Hi everyone, welcome to Truth in Shadows. Thank you for joining us. What would drive a brilliant woman to betray her husband, whisper I love you to 3 different men, and then make someone disappear forever? This isn't fiction, it really happened in a quiet town where no one saw it coming. If you're into real stories that twist, surprise, and haunt you long after they're over, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us uncover more true crime cases hiding in the shadows. Let's begin. Before 2002, in the quiet town of River Pine, California, Vanessa Hartman's life looked, from the outside, like the kind many people dreamed of. She lived in a well-kept, 2-story house just a few blocks from the center of town, with white siding, deep blue shutters, and a small fenced-in garden where flowers bloomed neatly each spring. On the front porch, a wooden bench sat in the shade, and some evenings you could see her husband, Daniel, sitting there with their young son, reading or just listening to the sounds of the neighborhood settling down. Vanessa was admired in River Pine. She wasn't just a successful professional, she was something of a rarity. A woman with her own laboratory, contracts with local clinics, and a reputation for being both brilliant and driven. People often described her as sharp, no nonsense, and always one step ahead. She dressed simply but with precision, clean lines, cool colors, hair always tied back. She moved through the world like someone who didn't have time to waste. Her husband, Daniel Hartman, moved differently. He was calm, even-tempered, with a softness that some people found comforting and others found forgettable. He had worked in banking during the early years of their marriage, but after their son was born, he had given up his job to stay home full-time. He never seemed bitter about that choice. He cooked, cleaned, packed lunches, and walked his son to school every day. Daniel was steady, predictable. The kind of man who remembered birthdays, said please and thank you, and always checked the locks before bed. To anyone looking in from the outside, Vanessa and Daniel seemed perfectly matched. She had the ambition, he had the patience. She brought in the income, he made the house feel like home. They were modern, balanced, and stable, or so it seemed. But inside the walls of that house, things were different. Over time, Vanessa had begun to see Daniel in a new light, and not a kind one. What she once appreciated, his calm, his care, his gentleness, had turned, in her eyes, into weakness. She saw him folding laundry while she answered emails from medical suppliers. She saw him scrubbing the stove while she drafted grant proposals. And each time, something inside her pulled back. Resentment started to grow, quietly but firmly. She began making small comments. At first, they sounded like jokes, offhand remarks about how she worked with adults all day but came home to a babysitter. Then came sharper words. She called him a burden. Told him he had no drive. Accused him of using fatherhood as an excuse for giving up. Daniel tried not to take it personally. He said she was tired, stressed, overworked. He told himself she didn't mean it. But she did. She meant every word. Daniel still hoped. He suggested a weekend away, just the two of them. She said she was too busy. He tried leaving her notes, simple ones, reminders of old memories, quiet declarations of love. She read them and left them on the kitchen counter, never responding. He asked if she was unhappy. She said she was just focused. He asked if they could talk. She said she didn't have time. By the end of that year, Vanessa had emotionally checked out of the marriage. She no longer saw any value in repairing what was broken. She didn't want to talk things through. She didn't want to compromise. What she wanted more than anything was freedom. She wanted a life without Daniel's quiet presence, without his gentle questions, without the feeling of being anchored to someone she no longer respected. And while Daniel sat at home, waiting for things to get better, Vanessa was already gone in every way that counted. Because behind his back, she had started living a secret life, one that would soon change everything. In early 2002, the days in Riverpine were still cold, but spring was beginning to whisper its return. The streets looked the same, the town still quiet, and Vanessa Hartman's life on the surface had not changed. She still drove her silver sedan to her private lab every morning, still wore her white coat and carried a clipboard, still greeted staff with short, polite nods. To the outside world, she was the same driven scientist, respected by her peers, trusted by her clients, admired by those who watched her rise through hard work and intelligence. But behind that practiced image, Vanessa was slipping further and further into another life. One that existed in the margins, hidden, carefully curated, and deliberately dangerous. She was still married to Daniel. They still lived under the same roof, ate at the same kitchen table, passed each other in the hall. But the warmth had gone completely cold. Vanessa no longer engaged in conversation beyond basic needs. Her smile, when she used it, was distant. She spent most nights locked in her home office or claimed she had to return to the lab. Sometimes she didn't come home until dawn. She always had an explanation: system crash, equipment failure, a client emergency. Daniel, exhausted and increasingly isolated, believed her because he had no reason not to. But none of those nights were spent at work. Vanessa had begun seeing other men. Not one. Not two. Three. Each relationship was separate. Each carefully kept apart from the others. And each man, unknowingly, was playing a part in Vanessa's secret performance. The first was Greg, a pharmaceutical liaison she'd met through lab supply contracts. He was in his mid-40s, recently divorced, with a quiet charm and a habit of oversharing. Vanessa played the part of the misunderstood wife. She told him she was trapped in a marriage where love had died years ago, that her husband no longer saw her. She described Daniel as emotionally distant, even controlling, a lie that Greg accepted without question. To Greg, she was soft-spoken and vulnerable. She smiled more. She let him hold her hand across the table and leaned into his shoulder when they walked in public, but always in towns far enough from Riverpine that no one would see them. She sent him long messages late at night, signing off with lines like, "You're the only man I trust." The second was Caleb, a lab technician she had met at a biochemistry conference in Sacramento. Younger, more confident, more assertive than Greg. With him, Vanessa took on a different role entirely. She was bold, restless, full of desire. She told him her marriage had been over for years and that she was only staying for the sake of her son. She used phrases like, "I'm so close to being free, and if only he was gone, I could finally be with you." Caleb loved the drama of it, the idea of being the secret escape, the forbidden passion. He believed her every word. He told her to leave Daniel, to run away with him. She said, "Soon." The third was Ethan, the youngest of the three, just 27, with a charming awkwardness and a romantic heart. He worked part-time at a chemistry supply store and was studying for his master's degree. Vanessa met him by chance, or so it seemed, during a purchase. She struck up a conversation, and he was hooked. With Ethan, she pretended to be newly single, taking time to rediscover herself after a long, difficult relationship. She never mentioned Daniel at all. Instead, she played the part of a woman rebuilding her life from the ground up, quiet, shy, but slowly opening her heart to someone who made her feel young again. Ethan believed he was her first real chance at happiness in years. He brought her coffee at her lab, left notes tucked into supply boxes, and once waited outside for 2 hours just to walk her to her car in the rain. She told him, softly and often, "You're the only one who sees the real me." Each man believed he was special. Each man believed he was the only one. But for Vanessa, none of it was about love. It was about escape, control, power, These relationships gave her a sense of movement, like she was no longer stuck in the quiet, slow, suffocating life she had built with Daniel. She felt alive when she was lying. She felt smart when she could balance 3 separate lives without slipping. The thrill of it wasn't in the affection, it was in the deception. Daniel, meanwhile, noticed her fading presence but didn't know what it meant. He told himself they were just going through a hard phase. He offered to take their son on weekend trips to give her space. He stopped asking about her schedule. He started preparing meals for just 2 people instead of 3. He folded her laundry and left it neatly outside her door. And when she didn't say thank you, he pretended not to notice. But Vanessa noticed. She noticed how easy it was to walk past him now. How he didn't raise his voice. How he still believed that time would fix what she had already destroyed. By mid-2002, the double life had become a routine. Vanessa rotated between the 3 men like a calendar. Mondays and Wednesdays were for Greg, who preferred quiet dinners. Fridays for Caleb, who liked late-night drives and wine by the lake. Ethan was more flexible, often invited last minute under the pretense of needing help at the lab. She kept separate phones. She had hidden accounts. She even used different perfume for each man. And still, none of them knew. Not about each other. Not about Daniel. Not about the storm that was slowly forming in her mind. Because the deeper Vanessa went into these lies, the clearer her next thought became: she didn't want to go back. She didn't want to end the affairs. She didn't want to return to her marriage. But divorce, real, legal divorce, meant compromise. It meant lawyers, court dates, custody agreements. It meant splitting the house, the savings, and most of all time with her son. Vanessa didn't want that. She didn't want to share. She wanted it all. And so, sometime in the quiet stretch between summer and fall, a new idea began to grow in her mind. It started as a passing thought, then returned a few days later, more fully formed. By October, it had a shape. A purpose. A possibility. What if she didn't have to choose? What if there was a way to erase the life she no longer wanted without giving up the one she was creating? She didn't say it out loud. Not yet. But the idea was there, steady as a heartbeat. And once it arrived, it never left. The lies weren't enough anymore. The secrets, the seduction, the quiet thrill, they had carried her this far, but they wouldn't take her where she truly wanted to go. For that, she would need to take the next step. And in her mind, she had already begun to plan how. By the middle of 2003, the air in Riverpine had shifted. Summer was approaching, and the long, slow days seemed to stretch out with a strange stillness. On the surface, everything remained calm. The lawns were mowed, sprinklers ticked across the grass in the early mornings, and kids rode bikes under the shade of wide trees. But behind the doors of Vanessa Hartman's lab, something else was taking shape. Something quiet. Something cold. Vanessa had made up her mind. She wasn't going to beg for freedom. She wasn't going to pay for it in court or bargain her way through a messy divorce. She wasn't going to hand over weekends with her son, or split the house she had worked so hard to build. She had lived long enough in silence, long enough pretending. Now, she was ready to remove the final obstacle in her way. And for that, she needed help. That help came in the form of Eric Monroe, a young man of 21, barely out of school, who had interned at Vanessa's lab the year before. He was eager, inexperienced, and had always looked up to Vanessa with something close to awe. She remembered that about him. The way he listened so closely when she spoke. The way he followed her instructions without hesitation. He respected her, maybe even admired her. And more importantly, he trusted her. So when Vanessa reached out to him in June of 2003, he answered right away. They met at a small diner outside town, away from the lab and away from anyone who might know them. Vanessa wore sunglasses and kept her voice low. She didn't talk about the past. She talked about opportunities. She said she needed someone she could rely on for a personal matter. Someone discreet. Someone loyal. She told Eric there was money involved, and possibly more connections, recommendations, maybe even a full-time position at the lab. He didn't ask too many questions. He nodded. He said yes. The instructions came slowly at first. Vanessa asked Eric to help clean out a private garage she owned on the edge of River Pine. It had been empty for years, full of dust and old tools. He cleared it out in a day. Then, she asked him to help move a large industrial-grade metal drum from her supply unit to a back room in the lab. She said it was for new storage purposes. When he asked what was going inside, she smiled and said, "That's not your concern." At the same time, Vanessa began ordering large quantities of hydrochloric acid, more than she had ever used before. She told her suppliers she was preparing for a high-volume sterilization process. No one questioned her. She had the credentials, the licenses, the reputation. And all the paperwork looked legitimate. Inside the lab, she made changes. She moved equipment around. Set up plastic sheeting in one of the back storage rooms. Installed a new lock on the inner door. No one else had access to that part of the lab except her and now, Eric, when she needed him. He still didn't know what it was for. But he kept helping. She told him the work had to remain secret. "If people ask," she said, "tell them we're upgrading equipment for a private client. Tell them you signed a non-disclosure agreement." He nodded. He trusted her. And all the while, Vanessa kept playing her other roles. She still saw her lovers. Greg, Caleb, and Ethan. Each in their own town, on their own day, in their own little world where she was the broken-hearted woman about to be free. To Greg, she sighed over coffee, "I'm so close. Just a little more time." To Caleb, she said with fire in her voice, "Soon, I'll be done pretending." To Ethan, she whispered, "Hold on for me. I promise I'm almost yours." They believed her. Every word. They had no reason not to. And none of them had any idea what she was really doing. In early July 2003, Vanessa began preparing specific tools. She purchased thick rubber gloves, industrial-grade goggles, and plastic sheeting items that might seem ordinary in a lab setting, but not in the quantity she ordered. She stored everything in the locked room behind her lab, where no one else ever entered. She also began testing the acid. Small samples, slow burns. She timed how long it took for various materials to react. She recorded temperatures, decay rates, disposal times. She documented everything, but not on her computer. She used a handwritten notebook, which she kept hidden beneath a false bottom drawer in her office desk. Eric continued to follow her instructions without hesitation. He installed a heavy-duty drain under her direction, telling himself it was just for chemical waste. He hauled in buckets and large plastic containers, scrubbed the floor, and sealed the windows shut with plastic film. Vanessa was always calm, always in control. She never raised her voice. Never looked nervous. If anything, she seemed energized. One evening, after moving a final box of supplies into the garage, Eric asked her if everything was okay. Vanessa paused. Then she looked him in the eye and said, "Once this is done, everything will finally be right." He didn't ask what this meant. By mid-July, Vanessa had stopped sleeping. She barely went home. Daniel noticed, of course. But by now, they were ghosts in the same house. He asked fewer questions. He spent more time with their son. He cleaned the kitchen alone at night while Vanessa stayed out past midnight. When she did come home, she said nothing. She went straight upstairs, showered, and locked the bedroom door behind her. On the nights she didn't come home at all, Daniel stopped calling. And still, Vanessa continued preparing. She tested the soundproofing of the back room. She checked the locks. She checked them again. She had Eric reinforce one of the doors with a steel bolt. She told him it was for biohazard safety. He believed her. And as she stared at the industrial drum in the center of the room, its lid tightly sealed, the acid inside already measured and poured, Vanessa Hartman felt nothing. Not fear. Not guilt. Not hesitation. Only clarity. Everything had led to this. The morning of August 8, 2003, began like any other in River Pine. The sun rose early, the skies were clear, and a gentle breeze swept through the quiet neighborhoods. Birds chirped softly in the distance, and the air still held a trace of summer warmth that hadn't yet turned sharp with the coming fall. To anyone looking from the outside, it was just another Friday. Inside the Hartman home, Daniel Hartman moved with a sense of quiet purpose. He dressed neatly in a short-sleeved shirt and khaki pants, combed his hair carefully, and stood in the hallway mirror for a long moment, almost like he was preparing for something important. That morning, he told a friend he was meeting Vanessa to talk about their son. Nothing dramatic. Just a conversation. A chance, perhaps, to try one more time to reconnect, to talk things through. He didn't sound worried. If anything, he seemed hopeful. By early afternoon, Daniel left the house. He drove his old sedan through the tree-lined streets of River Pine, the same roads he'd driven down 1,000 times. He didn't know that he wouldn't be driving back. Vanessa had told him to meet her at a private garage she owned near the edge of town. She claimed it was quiet, a better place to talk, away from the house and distractions. She said she had something serious to say. Daniel agreed. He didn't question her. He still trusted her even after everything. Eric Monroe was already there when Daniel arrived. Vanessa had instructed him where to stand, what to do, what to say. The garage was clean and empty, except for a work table, a few closed cabinets, and the heavy steel door at the back leading to what Daniel believed was a storage room. What he didn't know was that behind that door was the beginning of something far more terrifying. Vanessa greeted Daniel with an almost mechanical calmness. She gestured for him to step inside. He hesitated for only a second before walking into the space she had prepared. The air inside was cool, quiet, and had a faint chemical scent, something sharp and unfamiliar. The walls had been covered in plastic sheeting. The windows were sealed. The industrial drum stood in the corner, half hidden behind a rolling cart and a row of storage bins. Before Daniel could ask a single question, the plan began. What happened next would never be fully seen by the public. No security footage existed. No eyewitnesses came forward. But through Eric's later confession and physical evidence found at the scene, investigators were able to piece together the series of cold, calculated steps. Daniel was caught off guard. Overpowered. Trapped. Vanessa, dressed in full lab gear, gloves, mask, goggles, moved with precision. She didn't scream. She didn't hesitate. She executed the plan the same way she would carry out a complicated chemical process, with control, timing, and total emotional detachment. Eric, by his own words, stood frozen during much of it. He later admitted he didn't know what would happen in detail until it was already unfolding. But he didn't stop her. Inside the locked room of her lab, Vanessa completed what she had set in motion months earlier. The acid was ready. The equipment was in place. Every precaution had been taken. The ventilation had been adjusted. The floor drain had been reinforced. The goal was not just to end the marriage, it was to erase any possibility of return. No argument. No divorce papers. No court. No compromise. Daniel never had a chance. By the time night fell, Vanessa was back at home. She took a long shower. She folded laundry. She made herself a cup of tea. And when their son asked where Daddy was, she smiled and said, He's just out. He'll be back soon. But Daniel Hartman never came back. The next morning, when Daniel didn't answer his phone or show up for his planned visit with a friend, concern quickly turned into fear. His sister, who spoke to him regularly, called the police and reported him missing. She told them he had gone to meet Vanessa. She said he sounded fine. Calm. He wasn't depressed. He wasn't running away. Officers visited the Hartman home later that day. Vanessa answered the door in a gray cardigan and jeans. She looked relaxed. Confused. She told them Daniel had left the previous morning after their meeting and hadn't contacted her since. She even suggested, with a slight shrug, maybe he just left. He liked attention sometimes. The officers took the statement, but something felt off. It wasn't what she said, it was how she said it. No panic. No worry. No urgency. When detectives began to dig deeper, the pieces started to shift. First came the discovery that Vanessa had been ordering large quantities of hydrochloric acid for weeks. The amounts were far beyond what her lab typically used. The purchases were made under vague descriptions, with just enough paperwork to look official but not enough to explain their real purpose. Then came the neighbors. One mentioned seeing a young man, Eric Monroe, coming and going from the lab more frequently over the past month. Another mentioned loud noises late at night, but had assumed it was just repairs. Someone else recalled seeing Vanessa's car parked behind the garage at odd hours, always alone, sometimes overnight. When detectives questioned Vanessa again, she maintained her story. She said Daniel left after their meeting. That she went back to work. That she didn't know where he'd gone. But when they pulled security footage from nearby streets, Daniel's car was never seen leaving the garage property. And when they searched the lab, they found something strange. One of the storage rooms had recently been wiped clean. Too clean. Not a speck of dust. Not a fingerprint. Not a trace of the equipment that used to be there. That was when they called in Eric Monroe. At first, Eric tried to stay calm. He repeated what Vanessa told him to say. That he had helped with some lab projects. That he didn't know anything about Daniel. That he hadn't seen anything unusual. But under pressure, the cracks began to show. The interview stretched into hours. Eric's voice began to shake. He asked for water. Then a lawyer. Then, finally, in a quiet voice, he said, "She told me it was just a family problem." That's all she said. Once he opened the door, it didn't take long for everything to come out. Eric told detectives about the garage. About the drum. About the acid. About the gloves, the sealed windows, the plastic sheeting. He said he didn't know the full plan until it was already happening. That by the time he realized what Vanessa had done, it was too late. And he was too scared to walk away. He described Vanessa's calm instructions. Her silence. Her careful planning. The way she made it all feel like part of a controlled experiment. She never raised her voice. She never lost focus. She just executed. Based on Eric's confession and the evidence found in the lab, Vanessa Hartman was arrested within days. She didn't struggle. She didn't cry. She asked for a lawyer and said nothing more. When the news broke, Riverpine was stunned. People couldn't believe it. The quiet woman in the lab coat? The one with the perfect yard and polite smile? But those who knew her best, former lab assistants, clients, even Daniel's family, said the same thing. She always kept everything under control. Every single detail. And now, the darkest details had finally come to light. By the time the trial of Vanessa Hartman began in 2007, nearly 4 years had passed since the morning Daniel Hartman disappeared without a trace. But the small, tight-knit community of Riverpine had not forgotten. They followed every headline, every court date, every new detail revealed in hushed voices and evening news updates. What started as whispers had grown into something louder: confusion, disbelief, and deep anger. People wanted answers. And finally, in a courtroom in Fresno County, they began to get them. The courthouse was packed on the first day of the trial. Local reporters filled the front rows, their notepads ready, microphones clipped to their jackets. Behind them sat family members, neighbors, former co-workers, and those who had once called Vanessa a friend or admired her as a professional. Now they were here to watch her face the law, and possibly, the truth. Vanessa Hartman entered the courtroom with the same calm demeanor she had carried since her arrest. She wore a dark gray suit, minimal makeup, her hair pulled tightly back. She did not look to the gallery. She did not glance toward Daniel's family. She sat quietly next to her attorneys and waited. The prosecution didn't waste time. From the start, they painted Vanessa not just as a woman who had committed a crime, but as someone who had meticulously engineered it. They told the jury that this was not a moment of rage or an accident. It was a plan, years in the making, executed with precision. They showed how Vanessa had used her scientific background not to serve life, but to erase it. They explained how she had manipulated people around her, from a young, impressionable former intern to 3 separate men who believed they were each her one true love. One prosecutor looked directly at the jury and said, "She used her education the way someone might use a weapon. Not for healing. Not for research. But to destroy. Coldly. Quietly. Completely." Evidence came next. They presented the receipts for hydrochloric acid, the purchase logs from her lab supply accounts, the signed access logs showing only her and Eric Monroe entering the lab during key nights. They displayed the sealed security footage that placed Daniel arriving at her private garage on the day he vanished and never leaving. Then came Eric Monroe. He took the stand under heavy police protection. His voice was low, sometimes trembling, but he spoke clearly. He admitted to helping Vanessa prepare the space, move equipment, and clean the area afterward. He told the court that he didn't know exactly what she was planning until it was too late to stop her. When asked why he didn't walk away, he said quietly, "I was scared. She was in control of everything. I just followed orders." Defense attorneys attempted to discredit him. They suggested Eric was more involved than he admitted, that he had turned against Vanessa to save himself. But his testimony was supported by physical evidence, timestamps, and, more than anything, Vanessa's own silence. She never denied what he said. She never offered another version. When the prosecution began calling the men Vanessa had been secretly dating, the atmosphere in the courtroom changed. Greg, the pharmaceutical rep, said he believed they were in a committed relationship. "She told me she was finalizing a divorce," he said. "She said her husband was cold, that they barely spoke. She told me she wanted to start a new life with me." Caleb, the lab technician from Sacramento, testified next. "She told me if only he was gone, we could be together. I didn't take it seriously. I thought it was just talk." Then came Ethan. Nervous, younger than the others, with his hands clenched tightly in his lap. "She never even told me she was married," he said, voice shaking. "She said she was free. She said I was the only person who ever made her feel seen." Gasps were heard in the gallery. Some people shook their heads. Others looked down. One juror blinked hard and reached for tissues. The courtroom listened to how Vanessa had told each man he was the only one. How she built separate lives, separate stories. How she used their trust to build the illusion of love and used that illusion to justify her plan. Vanessa sat through every word without reaction. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She didn't shake her head or shift in her seat. Her face remained unreadable, a blank mask that betrayed nothing. When the defense began their arguments, they tried to suggest that Vanessa's actions were born from emotional distress. They described a woman overwhelmed, mentally unstable, under pressure from a broken marriage and mounting professional stress. But the cold planning, the chemical evidence, and Eric's detailed testimony made it nearly impossible to convince the jury otherwise. One moment that stuck with everyone came during closing arguments. The prosecutor looked at the jury and said, "She had every opportunity to leave, to walk away, to file for divorce like anyone else. But she didn't want to lose the house. She didn't want to share custody. She didn't want a fight. So instead of choosing the hard path, she chose the darkest one." It took the jury less than a day to reach a verdict. Vanessa Hartman was found guilty of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Eric Monroe, due to his cooperation and testimony, was sentenced to 15 years to life, with the chance of parole depending on behavior and psychological evaluations. When the sentence was read, Vanessa showed no visible emotion. No tears. No visible anger. She stood, nodded once, and was led out of the courtroom. But the weight of the trial didn't end there. In the days that followed, Daniel's family spoke publicly for the first time. His sister, holding a framed photo of Daniel holding his son, addressed the press through tears. Daniel was one of the kindest, most patient people you could ever meet. He gave up everything to support her, to raise their son, to build a quiet life. He didn't deserve what happened to him. And we will never stop remembering who he was, not how he was taken. Daniel's son, still a child at the time of the trial, was placed in the care of Daniel's sister and her husband. He would grow up far from River Pine, under a different name, with stories of who his father was and carefully chosen words about the mother who once smiled from the porch of their perfect little house. Behind her mask of calm and intelligence, Vanessa Hartman had fooled many people. But in that courtroom, stripped of control and surrounded by the people whose lives she had shattered, the truth had finally been revealed. Vanessa Hartman's story was never one of sudden rage, nor was it born from a single moment of emotional collapse. It unfolded slowly, piece by piece, over months and years, in silence and shadows. She didn't scream. She didn't panic. She didn't make threats or plead for sympathy. Instead, she observed, calculated, waited. And when the time came, she acted with the kind of precision most people would only expect from someone mixing chemicals, not taking a life. What made Vanessa's actions so chilling wasn't just the outcome, it was the method. This was not a crime committed in a heat of passion. It was structured like an experiment. Controlled variables. Predicted reactions. A desired result. Vanessa used the very tools that once built her career: science, logic, restraint, to destroy the person who once shared her home, her family, her life. In the quiet spaces of that laboratory, surrounded by stainless steel and chemical vials, she created not just a plan, but a new future for herself. One where Daniel no longer existed. Where her past could be rewritten, reshaped, erased. She could have walked away. She could have filed for divorce like millions of others. She could have separated lives the legal way, the honest way. But in Vanessa's mind, sharing wasn't an option. Sharing meant losing. Sharing meant weakness. Control was everything. And so she chose silence over conversation. She chose lies over truth. She chose to eliminate, not negotiate. And as she moved through each stage of the plan, from manipulation, to preparation, to execution, she did so without flinching. Even after the verdict, she never gave a full confession. She never apologized to Daniel's family. Not once during the trial did she express regret. The courtroom heard from her lawyers, her defenders, her past acquaintances, but not from her. Her silence said it all. Perhaps to her, speaking would have given others too much power. Perhaps the silence was her final attempt at control. Meanwhile, Daniel's name became a symbol of patience, of kindness, of sacrifice. Friends described him as gentle, generous, someone who never raised his voice. He had put his career aside to support Vanessa's. He believed in love, in family, in trying even when it was one-sided. He trusted the woman who would ultimately destroy him. And in that lies one of the most painful truths of this story: sometimes, the people we fear least are the ones who do the most damage, not because they rage, but because they plan. Not because they shout, but because they wait. Not because they're out of control, but because they're too much in it. In the years after the trial, Daniel's family worked quietly to preserve his memory. His sister kept photos in her living room. His son, raised far from River Pine, grew up with stories about his father's patience, his warmth, his laugh. The house where everything began was sold to a new family who knew little of its history. And the lab, once a place of research and routine, was shut down, the doors locked for good. Vanessa remains behind bars. No parole. No visitors except for the occasional attorney. Her name rarely appears in headlines now. The world moves on, as it always does. But for those who followed the case, for those who saw the courtroom photos and heard the witness testimonies, the memory lingers. This case is a reminder of what can happen when control becomes obsession. When logic is used not for progress, but for personal gain. When the line between discipline and destruction disappears. It teaches us that evil doesn't always come loudly. Sometimes, it whispers. Sometimes, it smiles. And sometimes, it wears a white lab coat. What do you think truly pushed Vanessa to make the choices she did? Was it pride? Fear of losing control? Or something deeper, more hidden? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story gripping, don't forget to like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to Truth in Shadows for more real-life cases that reveal the darkness hiding in plain sight. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next case.